and you can listen to John Hagee, who runs one of the biggest churches in the United States, talk about how nasty atheists are, and if they don't like God's country, they can get out of the United States, boy.
He must be about the only one who hasn't been caught with a rent boy. Haven't they all, almost all? I'm an atheist, I have been for many years. I don't believe in the little claims of the Bible or anything else. But I do recognize something which in Europe, at any rate, I see and I'm concerned about, which is what I regard as a vacuum. And one of the only interim answers I've been able to put forward is to say, we can accept the fact that we're atheists, we can accept the fact that we don't believe in literal truth and so on, and yet have to find a way to remind ourselves and each other of how we got to where we are. Because there's a whole set of things which I and others start to worry about. And one of the few ways I've found to try to explain this is to say that includes in engaging in parts of your past which you no longer believe in, at the very least to know how you got to where you are now. So I didn't say in that piece that people should go to church and praise the risen Lord, but to say to them, at least engage in the thing that got you to the place you are now and know how it happened. Let me put it another way very quickly. One of the most striking things, there's a British rabbi called Jonathan Sacks, who has some position here in New York as well. Some years ago I said to him, a slightly impertinent question, but I said, Rabbi Sacks, I know quite a lot of your congregation in London, and how can I put this, but they all seem to be atheists, or at least a lot of them. And without missing a beat, he said, oh, most of them, I'd have thought. And I said, you could see I was sort of slightly thrown, and I said, well, what do you take from that? And he replied rabbinically with a non-answer. He said, this year 98% of British Jews will be celebrating the holidays. And this is just an interesting way through a bit of this, it seems to me. Accepting the realities of where we are, but not casting people into it, particularly the people you and I both know and have come across, who find the position, once they arrive there, of atheism to be a very lonely place. And I just, as I say, it's not an answer to the whole thing, but as an interim thing, to say at least remain engaged in all of this idea and all of this past. Engage with it.
I think I might understand what some of the confusion and concern is, and I suspected some of this is differences on either side of the pond. And for me, not having grown up in Britain, suffocated by Church of England, and its largely atheistic irrelevancy, I find it strange that you're trying to a rabbi who says that 98% of Jews are going to be celebrating the holidays. I'm assuming he's talking about Christmas.
Oh, no, he's talking about the Jewish holidays.
He's talking about the Jewish holidays. And yet, we know that, I think studies have shown that 50% of Jews in Israel are secular.
Sure.
And Reform Judaism doesn't require any belief in a God. So
sure.
we often make a mistake of talking about religion as if it's one thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's absolutely false, because Judaism, even in its varieties, is already very different. The Reform Judaism doesn't require a belief in a God, and so you get a rabbi that's not surprised that his congregation is largely atheist, and then you get conservative and Hasidic Jews that I doubt very many of those are atheists, and then you have the various varieties of Christianity, and one of the questions that's come up quite often is, why is the view of religion in the UK so much different from the way it is in the States? And I've often heard it put forward that this is an issue of a free market, where in the UK, because you have a state religion, there was no competition to draw people in, and the United States, we had freedom of religion, and so they're in competition to market.
Yes, let me give an example of that. Everybody in the UK lives technically in a parish, and that means that the priest in that parish could, even if you were a non-believer, be responsible for your spiritual well-being, for your funeral, for instance. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that everyone automatically gets a Church of England funeral, but it means that the default position is that the state church would be there. Whereas I think if you were a Catholic, for instance, if you were an atheist and you died, your local Catholic church would not stake any claim for your religious rights. So there is yes, it has done something strange like that. The other thing is just that, who knows, it's just a lot more advanced in Europe for good and ill, but that they say that, well, the southern Mediterranean states, Italy, Catholic Church is very strong still, Spain, very strong. So, you have to draw up these distinctions within it. But basically in the Protestant parts of Europe, yeah, there's very little. They some time ago, I think, became basically the Green Party at prayer. They explain how important it is to tackle global warming and so on, which is all good, but it's not saying to people, you have to affirm the creed, otherwise you're going to hell.
I heard good things about Spain in the last few years, pulling away from the church and instituting a far more secular government.
Yeah.
To the point where I joked that if my country became a theocracy, I'd go to Spain because at least I had 2 years of high school Spanish, which sets me up better.
The country that is most striking in is Ireland. I first went to Ireland. I did my first book in the late 90s, 2000. And then Ireland was still a very, very, it's the most oppressively religious country in Europe I'd been to. The Catholic Church had such a grip. Today, I don't think you could find a more secular country. It's really fascinating, and it's one thing in particular, which is a clerical abuse scandal, which has just turned the Irish people, understandably, against the whole thing. And, to the extent that a bishop now stands up and makes a moral pronouncement, and the Irish public want to do the opposite. In fact, the Catholic Church, I can't remember what was in the abortion debate or the gay marriage. Yes, they sat out the gay marriage debate, basically, because they knew that if they came out against, the public vote in the referendum would be even bigger for gay marriage.
And the scandals, they go deep there. They're not just dealing with pederasts and child rapists. This was theft of children from unwed mothers and workhouses and just...
and in living memory.
Yeah.
No, it's an extraordinary thing, but to see a society shift that fast in 18 years or so is a remarkable thing.
Which kind of sticks a pin in what everybody who knows me knows I've been waiting to object to. If the fear is we're losing something, so as a stopgap measure, go back to what got you here. I might have a slight issue with going back to what got us here if the place we are is that we're bleeding and bloody on the ground after the fall. But one of the things that the secular community in the United States has been doing, for the longest time, atheism in the United States was a bunch of guys that looked like me complaining about how much religion sucked and congratulating themselves for getting the right answer to what I think is literally the easiest question: do I have enough reason to believe this? But as we move forward, and the percentage of the population that identify as nuns, the NONEs, no religious preference and no religious identity, we've started to do things like, well, actually Sunday Assembly, I think, started in Britain, but it's here as well, an Oasis, and we're building landing places that are founded on principles of secular humanism, which can serve as one potential moral and virtue guiding principle, but also create places for people to land when they find their way out of religion.
Sure.
And I'm happy to tell people, I go to church not for the reasons that you're suggesting, but I go to church more often than people would guess, because on the TV show, I want to make sure that I am not strawmanning religious views.
Do you ever get surprised when you do that?
Not anymore.
No.
There's been a massive change from when I was younger. I mean, I went to a Southern Baptist church primarily. I would occasionally go to Pentecostal churches because they had better concerts. And they would have the Christian rock bands of Petra and Carmen and stuff, and they'd all come to those churches. So I liked those.
The very words Christian rock band just made me kind of come goose pimply.
I feel the same way when I hear Christian magician, but that's another story. But growing up in those kinds of churches, I want to make sure that I'm not only relying on the version of Christianity that I grew up with, and that I'm not relying on something from 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I will go to some of the churches. The mega churches, even most of the people I grew up with who were religious would look at most of the modern mega churches and say, well, that's not Christianity.
Right.
Now, I don't get to say what is or isn't Christianity. That's for them to decide. But it is very much, you don't get dressed up in your Sunday best anymore. You go in jeans and a t-shirt, and you're singing rock songs that have been perhaps mildly converted to be a little bit more about God. That some atheist on LSD wrote this song for the secular world, and the church has managed to co-opt it, and they've co-opted the slogans from everything. You'll have T-shirts of the McDonald's shirts, and they'll twist the McDonald's logo to be about Jesus and all this stuff.
How do they do that?
It is.
What?
So Seth Andrews, everybody loves Seth? Yeah. Yes. He hosts the Thinking Atheist podcast. He has a video up specifically going through the various things that Christian organizations steal. They twist it around.
How do they get Jesus out of McDonald's?
Does anybody remember the specific one from McDonald's? I don't know, but there was
Wow.
They take Mountain Dew logos, everything, and just turn it into this. It is very much a marketing thing, and I don't want to ever say that somebody's being disingenuous about their beliefs.
Sure.
But when we talk about, hey, maybe we've lost something, I don't think that I could ever send people to church for that reason, and it may just be a difference in the type of church that we're talking about.
Yeah, it may be. I mean, as I said, I don't want to overemphasize it, but I mean, there are tiny, tiny pockets where what I'm saying is not the case. The island in the Outer Hebrides that my father comes from, there are about 30 different sects of Presbyterianism, within about a square mile of each other, and they're a bit watered down, but not that much. But otherwise, you as I say, it's fascinating to me because I've been doing this for 20 years or so, and I've just noticed that the entire discussion on ethics, for instance, if you go to the BBC or something and you have a discussion on ethics, 15 years ago, you'd always have a bishop, purple robe, big cross, and so on. And now they just don't go for those guys. And when they do, those guys don't have much to add, it seems. I mean, you can, regret or otherwise, I don't particularly, but you can see they just don't know how to find a way into the discussions we're now having.
And this is something I've actually been kind of standing in opposition to here, because you'll watch the news and there will be some member of the clergy on to comment on seemingly everything. I'm exaggerating slightly, but there'll be a political discussion and you'll have to get the minister's view of it. And it happens in the local communities as well as the national news. I remember a CNN brief piece, but it stuck in my mind forever because the banner behind them was, "Why do atheists inspire such hatred?" Of course, I immediately point out the question is flawed because it presumes that we're the ones inspiring this, rather than why is hatred directed at atheists? Because then it could be our fault or their fault or a combination. So asking the wrong questions is probably one of the biggest problems in the world right now. But they had a panel on to discuss it. How many atheists were on that panel? None.
Really?
Not one. 2 Christians and a Jew to explain to the world that atheists were just really bad at PR, and that we didn't have any morals to live by.
My sense is, by the way, and again, I mean this is a positive, my sense even in this country is that a lot of the religious leaders, they don't quite want to tell you what they really believe, which is a step in the right direction. And my impression still is that most of them know that the culture has shifted or is shifting significantly enough that they know that some of the things they might believe or might have claimed 20 years ago have become total landmines for them.
So here's what we'll do. You come down to Austin, we'll take a drive to San Antonio, and you can listen to John Hagee, who runs one of the biggest churches in the United States, talk about how nasty atheists are, and if they don't like God's country, they can get out of the United States, boy.
He must be about the only one who hasn't been caught with a rent boy. Haven't they all, almost all, and I notice any And late friend Christopher Hitchens used to have a great riff on this, that you know, whenever you saw any of them holding forth on moral issues, you just make a note, and before you knew it, you'd find they'd maxed out the credit card, trying to pay some rent boy,